yes, sometimes we have this temptation of trying to water down our story so it can fit in. But I think it is the wrong way to approach story. Because if you look at even history, for example, you see that history are actually two words. His story, which also mean that history is nothing more than a point of view. It means it is written from a point of view. That is why it's called history. Otherwise, it will simply be story. When we want to talk about story, where we might have lacuna there is that there are the conventional story that is in the hands of the person who is writing the story, who happen to have won. No? But we don't need to see our story from that lens, because we are not the writer of their story, or what they want to call the global story. If we want to make sure our story is part of the global story, then that story must be read from our point of view, because it is our experience. It is what we have passed through. We must also have an objective, that our story is also important. We also have a point of view. We have also passed through an experience. I think that is critically important for us as people of African descent and as people of African in the diaspora.
Race our narratives to the ones that we don't like or love. And we oversimplify. When we give persons our narratives, sometimes they oversimplify it, and it reduces the importance of it and what it really means and the power that it carries, because it is so misrepresented that it is so different from what we originally started with. And the last point I want to make is that we must be very guarded how we universalize our stories, our narratives as a diaspora, as a group. Because the universalization of our stories greatly diminishes the impact of our stories, because we want it to fit into other person's narratives, even especially if we are using our narratives to make money for ourselves as a source of income. We tend to universalize it to the point where it now becomes a one size that fits all, and it can't be. Our stories and our narratives are very unique, and they are unique for a reason. They are unique because they carry with it a certain power, and we are not to allow money. We are not to allow wanting it to reach the whole world. We are not to allow external interpretations or boundaries on how we are to carry our story, limit the power or make us ignore the power dynamics in our story, or silence us because it sounds to be such a difficult conversation, or make us rush to publish or share stories that people feel are sensational enough for, or it will have such an impact for their own ends. So we must be guarded about those things. Thank you so much for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much. I can feel your energy. That feeling is very important. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. And of course, I want to encourage also the people in the audience. If you feel something, the feeling is important, and you want to say something, please welcome. We want to hear also from you, because we believe that you are also experiencing something. That thing you are experiencing and how you are approaching it is important for us. I see beautiful faces there. Dauda, Iyabo, Janice, Trudy. Thank you so much for joining us. Gustav, Lisa, Eliza. Okay, yeah, we have Lisa and also Eliza. Okay, we have Faith there. Thank you for being there. Rosha, Akita, and Dr. Marvis. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate each and every one of you. So if you believe there is something you have to say, please join and say it because your point of view is important. You see, some of the things that was actually noted down from your speech, Dr. Mancia, is that yes, sometimes we have this temptation of trying to water down our story so it can fit in. But I think it is the wrong way to approach story. Because if you look at even history, for example, you see that history are actually two words: his story, which also mean that history is nothing more than a point of view. It means it's written from a point of view. That is why it's called history. Otherwise, it will simply be story, which is to say now that history is written from the point of view of the person who wins. In terms of national history, in terms of international history, the person who wins gets to write the history. But now, when we want to talk about story, where we might have lacuna there is that there are the conventional story that is in the hands of the person who is writing the story, who happen to have won. No? But we don't need to see our story from that lens because we are not the writer of their story or what they want to call the global story. If we want to make sure our story is part of the global story, then that story must be read from our point of view because it is our experience, it is what we have passed through. There are very many dynamics to this. I understand there are economic, there are political, there are a lot of things into this. So that when we try to fit in, we also should be careful that we are not watering down our story so that it fits into the narrative of somebody who have created a certain narrative because they want an objective for themselves. We must also have an objective that our story is also important. We also have a point of view. We have also passed through an experience. I think that is critically important for us as people of African descent and as people of African in the diaspora. All right, having said that, I have a question I want to ask Yemi. The question have to do with the platform. I like what you were saying before, that today you went out to have a walk with some people and you were gathering information about them. And in fact, you already did make mention of the fact of the platform. So I'm looking for what are some of the ways that we can have a collaborative platform to share story? Because for us to be able to talk about collective narrative, we need to share. We need to have a place where we can share. What is your take on that?
Okay. One thing I just wanted to say is today when I went out walking, it was basically an informal walk, just people sharing their stories organically. I wasn't making any record, but I could see how it could grow into something that could be documented. But going back to how we can share our stories, I think one of the important things from what everyone has said as speakers is even part of the collective story, we have to acknowledge that there's the individual story. And that ties into what Obia was saying about who is telling the story. When it's the individual story and then it becomes part of a collective, it can be very unique to you and you alone because it's more original. However, in terms of before I go on to how we can tell our stories, one thing that comes to mind also is when we tell our stories, we always have to focus on it has to be solution focused as well. And I say that because even as much as we know our stories are as a lot of pain, trauma, grief, yes, in the past, and we acknowledge that and we need to know what our griefs are even individually because it impacts your future. However, we also need to, as Dr. Marcia was saying, we need to acknowledge where we are or where you are today with your individual story, and now it can be part of a collective story. And what are you celebrating today? And also, when we look at solution focused coaching or ideas, you have to think of what, with your story in the past and the present, and how you want to share your story, what are the filters impacting the perception and originality of your story before it even becomes part of a collective story? Okay. In terms of systems, so now I'm going to talk about individual story. When we look at even collective or individual stories, yes, we look at the past, we look at our forefathers, we look at how our history of our forefathers, fathers, mothers, and how we now live, part of that story, how it's impacted on us. But also, We also have to share stories of your present generation. How does it relate to what has impacted your past or certain things your some people will say